As we grow older, the question of whether it's better to be alone or with a partner becomes more significant. Society has always pushed the idea that relationships are essential for happiness, security, and fulfillment, especially in later years. But what if this widely accepted belief is more of a societal construct than a universal truth? What if the pressure to find companionship is a myth that overlooks the richness of individual happiness? In this video, we're going to challenge this belief by exploring the surprising power of solitude in old age. You might find that being single, rather than a source of loneliness, can actually be the key to freedom, peace, and true happiness. Let's uncover how embracing solitude can offer a fulfilling path in later life. The myth of everlasting love. Romantic love has long been considered the ultimate goal of human existence. From an early age, we are conditioned to believe that love is the solution to our problems. It's the fairy tale we grow up with, the story where the hero and heroine find each other and live happily ever after. This narrative is reinforced throughout our lives in countless ways, through movies, literature, advertising, and even the expectations set by family and friends. Society perpetuates the belief that being in a relationship is synonymous with success, while being single is often seen as a failure or a sign of something lacking in one's life. As we mature, these societal ideals shape the way we approach relationships. We're told that to be truly happy, we must find a partner who will complete us, that the ideal life involves sharing everything with someone else. But if you look closer, you will find that this cultural narrative is not only flawed, but limiting. It blinds us to the possibility of finding fulfillment within ourselves, outside of the traditional confines of romantic love. It paints a picture of life in which people are dependent on others for their happiness, creating a kind of emotional dependency that can stifle personal growth and self-discovery. While society values romantic relationships as a measure of success, the reality is that many people remain in relationships out of habit or societal pressure rather than genuine desire. They fear being judged or ostracized for not conforming to the norm, so they continue to seek companionship even when it no longer serves their well-being. What often goes unspoken is the fact that many people in relationships feel more alone than ever before. Emotional distance, unspoken resentments, and unmet needs often remain hidden behind the facade of a committed partnership. The freedom of being alone. The decision to embrace solitude in old age is often met with discomfort and suspicion. Many people fear being alone because they've been conditioned to believe that loneliness is a negative state, something to be avoided at all costs. However, the truth is that being alone does not have to equate to loneliness. In fact, for many, solitude becomes a path to greater self-understanding, independence, and peace of mind. In older age, the pressures to find a partner or maintain a relationship can be overwhelming. People often feel that if they don't have someone to share their life with, they are somehow incomplete or unsuccessful. This belief can lead to anxiety and frustration as individuals try to meet societal expectations rather than their own personal needs and desires. However, there is a growing recognition that embracing solitude can provide freedom from these pressures and lead to a more fulfilling life. When you are alone, you are free from the emotional entanglements that come with being in a relationship. You are free to pursue your passions, to focus on your health and well-being, and to explore the world on your own terms. There is no need to compromise your desires or goals for the sake of someone else. You can create a life that is entirely your own, one that is not dictated by external expectations or societal pressures. In solitude, you are able to reflect on your past, assess your current desires, and make decisions based on your own needs and happiness. There is no need to conform to societal norms or play out a script that has been handed down to you by others. You are free to live authentically, without the fear of judgment or criticism. This freedom allows for a deeper connection with yourself, something that is often lacking in relationships where emotional dependency and fear of abandonment cloud one's sense of self. The problem with emotional dependency. Emotional dependency is one of the most insidious aspects of relationships, particularly as people age. The idea that we need someone else to be happy is not only unhealthy, but also fundamentally misguided. It perpetuates the myth that we are incomplete without a partner, leading us to seek validation and fulfillment from others rather than cultivating these qualities within ourselves. In many relationships, especially those that begin later in life, emotional dependency can take hold in subtle but powerful ways. People may stay in relationships out of fear of being alone, or because they have been told that it is the right thing to do. However, emotional dependency often leads to feelings of resentment, frustration, and dissatisfaction. Rather than offering support and companionship, these relationships can become a source of stress, anxiety, and insecurity. The reality is that no relationship can truly fix you or solve your problems. Love, as we have been taught to understand it, is often a form of emotional possession. It becomes about needing someone else to feel whole, rather than recognizing that true happiness comes from within. When we depend on someone else for our emotional well-being, we lose touch with ourselves and relinquish our power. True freedom comes from learning to love yourself first. It is about being at peace with who you are, independent of anyone else. When you can be happy on your own, you no longer need a relationship to feel fulfilled. This independence allows for deeper, more authentic connections when you do choose to engage with others, whether in romantic relationships or in friendships. The dangers of staying in unfulfilling relationships. One of the greatest tragedies in life is staying in a relationship that no longer serves you out of a fear of being alone or a desire to conform to societal expectations. People often continue in relationships that are emotionally draining, unfulfilling, or even toxic because they cannot bear the thought of facing life without a partner. They are trapped in a cycle of emotional dependency, unable to break free because of the fear of judgment and the belief that being single is somehow a failure. However, staying in an unfulfilling relationship can be more damaging than being alone. It leads to a slow erosion of self-esteem, personal growth, and emotional health. Over time, these relationships become a source of stress, anxiety, and frustration rather than joy and support. When people remain in these situations, they are essentially trading their happiness for the illusion of companionship. But as the relationship continues to deteriorate, the emptiness they feel only grows. The problem is compounded by the fact that many people in relationships are emotionally distant from their partners, even when they are physically together. The emotional isolation that can exist within a relationship is often more painful than being alone. This is especially true when there is a lack of communication, trust, or mutual understanding. Couples may stay together out of inertia or fear, but the underlying truth is that they are no longer truly connected. The relationship becomes a hollow shell, a routine of shared space rather than a meaningful bond. Embracing solitude for true happiness. The key to true freedom and happiness in later years lies in embracing solitude. Solitude does not equate to loneliness. Rather, it represents an opportunity for self-discovery, personal growth, and emotional independence. When you are able to live authentically, without the need for external validation, you open yourself up to a world of possibilities. In solitude, you can explore your passions, pursue your interests, and develop a deeper understanding of who you are. You are no longer constrained by the expectations of others, and you can create a life that is truly meaningful to you. This sense of freedom allows you to connect with others on your own terms without the pressure of needing them to fulfill you emotionally. Rather than seeking companionship out of fear or societal pressure, embrace the opportunity to build a life of independence, self-love, and fulfillment. When you are at peace with yourself, you will find that the need for romantic relationships fades, and you can approach any future connections from a place of strength and authenticity. The rise of temptation and the illusion of monogamy. In today's digital age, temptation is not only more accessible, it is practically commodified. With social media and dating apps just a swipe away, we are constantly exposed to a world of potential partners and fleeting connections. What was once reserved for the realm of personal interactions and subtle flirtations is now available to anyone with a phone and an internet connection. The line between fidelity and temptation has become blurred, And this has made infidelity feel like an inevitable part of our relationships, especially in the context of monogamy. What's fascinating is that even as we become more aware of the prevalence of infidelity and its widespread nature, many of us still cling to the notion of monogamy. The societal narrative tells us that a loving, successful relationship is one where both partners remain exclusively committed to each other, no matter the temptation that might come their way. However, when we look around, it's clear that many of these relationships are based not on mutual respect or genuine desire, but on fear. Fear of being alone, fear of judgment, and fear of losing something that society has defined as the ideal, perpetual love. This illusion of monogamy can be likened to a facade, a mask we wear to convince ourselves and others that we are living according to the right way. We romanticize the idea of eternal commitment, much like we romanticize stories of knights rescuing damsels in distress, but in reality, these are outdated fantasies that do little to reflect the complexities of modern relationships. The truth is, as much as we may want to believe in the permanence of monogamy, the world has evolved and our understanding of love, intimacy, and human desire must evolve with it. The hypocrisy of forced fidelity. The biggest issue with the ideal of fidelity in today's world is not infidelity itself, but the hypocrisy that surrounds it. Many individuals and couples maintain these relationships under the guise of faithfulness, while in reality, they are bound together by control, insecurity, and societal expectations. Fidelity, when imposed out of obligation, becomes a form of emotional imprisonment, not a demonstration of love. It is a pact built on fear, not genuine connection or mutual respect. When sex, the most intimate and pleasurable act between two people, becomes a battleground for control, desire ceases to be the driving force. Instead, it becomes a negotiation based on fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of breaking an unspoken rule, and fear of losing the person we have come to rely on emotionally. This fear-based approach to intimacy makes it almost impossible to experience love and passion in their purest, most liberated forms. One of the greatest myths surrounding monogamy is that it guarantees emotional fulfillment and satisfaction, but in reality, it often leads to repression, not liberation. When we deny ourselves the freedom to explore our desires, when we imprison our sexual and emotional selves to fit within the boundaries of a relationship, we begin to suffocate. And when we start suffocating, resentment builds. The tension of suppressed desires, emotions, and needs only grows, and what was once a relationship full of promise and excitement becomes a mundane routine bound by guilt and obligation. Nature's lessons on freedom. Interestingly, if we look at the animal kingdom, we see a completely different model of companionship. Most animals do not adhere to the rigid concept of monogamy that humans have constructed. While some species do form long-term bonds, even those animals are not bound by the strict expectations of exclusivity that we impose on ourselves. Animals experience relationships freely, with little regard for the societal judgment we fear. They mate, they enjoy companionship, and they interact with others without the burden of guilt or societal condemnation. Humans, however, have managed to turn something as natural and pleasurable as sex into an obligation, an act that must be shared with the same person regardless of whether we feel the desire to do so. We call this commitment. But is that truly what it is? Is commitment about the willingness to share intimacy freely and without fear? Or is it about the imposition of societal expectations that ultimately serve to control our natural desires? Why should we allow outdated societal norms to dictate how we experience something as basic and fundamental as our desires? The very concept of mandatory fidelity, a lifelong commitment to one partner, often feels less like an agreement built on mutual love and more like a rule meant to restrict freedom. In truth, sex should not be viewed as a commodity to be restricted within the confines of a relationship, but as a natural pleasure that can be explored freely, without the burden of guilt or fear. The stigma of casual relationships. In a world where the pressures of monogamy are heavy, Those who engage in casual relationships or embrace non-traditional forms of intimacy are often viewed as outliers, people who cannot commit, who don't care about love, or who are emotionally detached. In particular, women who embrace their sexual freedom are often judged more harshly than their male counterparts, facing a level of social stigma that is rooted in the policing of female sexuality. The truth is that these individuals, far from being cold or detached, are simply living authentically. They are engaging in relationships, or lack thereof, based on mutual consent and desire, rather than societal expectations or guilt. These individuals are comfortable with their own bodies, their desires, and their choices. They reject the hypocrisy of societal norms that demand one thing while secretly condoning another. And while these individuals are often labeled with derogatory terms, their actions speak to a deeper truth, that freedom, particularly sexual freedom, is not something to be feared or repressed. In contrast, the real immorality lies in pretending to adhere to societal expectations while secretly desiring to break free. Those who champion fidelity as a moral imperative while fantasizing about cheating are perhaps the greatest hypocrites in the modern world. They are living in direct opposition to their own desires, trapped by the expectations placed upon them by society, unable to reconcile their need for freedom with their commitment to a relationship built on control. Breaking free from the prison of forced fidelity. At the heart of this dilemma is the question, what's stopping us from living authentically? The answer lies in the societal norms that shape our perceptions of relationships and commitment. We have been conditioned to believe that lifelong fidelity is the ultimate expression of love, yet the reality is that forced monogamy often creates more harm than good. Instead of fostering emotional connection and trust, it creates tension and resentment. Human desire, whether emotional or physical, is as natural as the need to breathe. The more we try to repress it, the more it consumes us. Forced fidelity does not honor our desires or our humanity. It forces us to live inauthentic lives. By denying ourselves the freedom to explore these desires, we risk destroying the very foundation of our relationships. When we choose to share our lives with someone, it should be because we share a common vision, mutual respect, and an understanding of each other's needs and desires. It should not be based on the belief that we need someone to complete us or to fulfill some societal expectation of what a normal relationship looks like. Love becomes fragile when it is based on dependency. When one person's happiness is entirely contingent on another, the relationship becomes unbalanced, and the bond between partners weakens. Relationships should never be about sacrifice or losing oneself for someone else. True love is about connection, mutual respect, and shared goals. The problem isn't necessarily having a partner. It's the belief that lifelong commitment is mandatory simply because society dictates it. When we live our lives based on these prescribed norms, we are setting ourselves up for unhappiness. The danger of control in relationships. One of the greatest dangers of forced fidelity is the need for control. Society has conditioned us to believe that controlling our partner's behavior is the only way to ensure their loyalty. The idea that constant surveillance, checking phones, questioning motives, and interpreting every silence is necessary to maintain a relationship is not only unhealthy, it's destructive. Control breeds resentment, and when resentment enters the relationship, love dies. What remains is a routine, an obligation, a partnership built on fear. In a world where infidelity is a constant threat, we have come to view fidelity as the ultimate proof of love. Yet, this obsession with control and surveillance only drives a wedge between partners. When trust is replaced by suspicion and fear, intimacy withers, passion fades, and all that remains is a partnership of convenience, one that is held together by societal expectations rather than genuine emotional connection. The importance of true freedom in relationships. True love does not require walls or imprisonment. If you must constantly monitor and control your partner to keep them by your side, you have already lost them in spirit. The concept of loyalty that is built on fear is a falsehood. It denies both partners the freedom to live authentically and to experience life fully. If you are constantly policing your partner's actions, checking their phone, or doubting their intentions, you have already broken the bond of trust. The relationship may continue, but it is no longer built on love. It is built on control. Freedom is essential for the growth of individuals within a relationship. When we embrace the truth that desire is natural and not something to be repressed, we allow space for authentic love to grow. Relationships can transform and evolve not because they are chaotic or untethered, but because desire is no longer viewed as a threat to the relationship. Rather, it is embraced as a vital part of the human experience, something to be shared and explored freely, without judgment or restriction. The false promise of security. Emma Goldman once stated, "The worst kind of slavery is the one where the slave loves their chains." This powerful observation speaks directly to how we live today. So many people, particularly in relationships, live in chains of their own making. They stay because of the perceived security that comes with a partner, but deep down they know that this security is not real. It is a comforting illusion, a cocoon that promises warmth but ultimately restricts freedom. These individuals often mistake this sense of security for love, when in reality, it is the absence of it. Relationships in many cases act like a net, an intricate web of promises and expectations that seem to offer stability, but ultimately lead to emotional instability. Rather than lifting each other up, these promises create pressure and obligation. The idea of emotional ownership becomes ingrained in our minds, making it difficult to function freely as individuals. People begin to rely on the other for validation, for emotional fulfillment, and for a sense of self-worth. The stigma of singleness. One of the most glaring examples of society's fixation on romantic relationships is the stigma placed on being single, particularly for women. Society has created an almost absurd race to find a partner, as if singlehood is a phase that must be overcome in order to lead a fulfilling life. Single people, especially those who remain unattached for an extended period, are often pitied. They are seen as though something is missing from their lives, but what society fails to realize is that the single person is not necessarily suffering. In many cases, they are living in a way that is more authentic, more aligned with their true self. They are not drowning in relationships that have long since expired or trapped in cycles of bitterness and obligation. They are not confined by the invisible chains of societal expectation. There is something remarkably freeing about being single, especially when embraced consciously and fully. The single person has the ability to stand outside of the societal pressure cooker, observing as others are trapped in relationships that no longer serve them. The joy of being single comes not from an absence of love, but from the presence of self-respect. The single individual can choose to live life on their terms, without negotiating their freedom for fleeting emotional connections or social approval. The threat of freedom. What's perhaps most interesting and uncomfortable for society is how the single person becomes a silent rebellion. A single individual who is content in their solitude threatens the very fabric of the societal structure that values romantic relationships above all else. They are living proof that love is not mandatory, that one does not need a partner to be complete. In fact, their freedom can make others question why they cannot live the same way. Society is obsessed with romanticism, but the single person provides an inconvenient truth. Love does not have to be defined by possession, by societal expectation, or by rigid roles. For some, freedom is far more fulfilling than the security of a relationship. The single person represents a break from this narrative, challenging the idea that romantic attachment is the ultimate goal of human life. This disruption is not merely theoretical, it's a tangible threat to the societal order. When one person lives without a partner, they create a crack in the narrative that suggests everyone must seek companionship to be fulfilled. The single person becomes a reminder that true happiness does not require another person to validate your existence, nor does it require a relationship to define your worth. The freedom to love without ownership. Singleness does not mean the absence of love. In fact, it creates space for love to flourish. Without the pressures of commitment, Relationships can exist freely, without contracts, emotional debts, or the expectation of ownership. Casual relationships, when based on mutual respect, honesty, and consent, are not threats to freedom. They are expressions of it. These relationships are spontaneous and authentic, rooted in a shared understanding and a desire to connect without the burden of possession. Singleness, when embraced fully, becomes an act of deep sincerity with oneself. It is a decision to no longer deceive oneself with the false promises of eternal love. It is the acceptance that love is not about ownership or control, but about freedom. It is the ability to love unconditionally, without attaching rigid promises or expectations. True connection does not require sacrifice or the loss of one's self. The ultimate freedom, living authentically. At its core, being single is a profound opportunity. It is a chance to explore every aspect of who you are, to learn what truly makes you happy, and to live without the weight of imposed commitments. Singleness is not a flaw or punishment. It is a destination. It is a place where you come to realize your worth and your strength, free from the pressures of societal expectation. This destination is called freedom, and it is a place that only a few ever truly reach. Most people become lost in relationships that should have never begun, relationships that distract them from their true self and hinder their growth. Being single is not about conforming to society's narrow standards or seeking approval from others. It is about taking ownership of your journey and creating your own narrative. It's about deciding for yourself what brings you peace and fulfillment. If that path involves walking alone for a time, then let it be a walk that is rich with self-discovery, personal growth, and the deepening of self-love. In the end, the true measure of happiness is not found in the presence or absence of a partner, but in your ability to live authentically and honor yourself. Peace is found within, and it is up to each person to decide what path nourishes their spirit. The key is not the status of being single or in a relationship. It is being true to yourself, walking a path that aligns with your inner truth.